I just want to say all of that wonderful introduction there, which does, sell me to sound very brilliant, did take an entire decade of hard work and perseverance and pushing and getting past all the self-doubt and all the rejections before you reach those pinnacle moments. So it's always worth to just keep persevering through it if you want to share your words. So I'm excited about today because we're going to be writing about memories, and I think it is such an important thing to realize the power that we have stored within ourselves, within our body, that can inspire us and navigate us to create these new stories that we can share with everyone else, and to kind of keep record of life as it happens and document it in some way and create that as an art form. So today we're going to teleport back in time, and I'm going to teach you how to step back into a memory and invoke the feelings you felt in that moment captured in the photograph that you've brought along with you today. So first of all, I just want to define what memoir is, the dictionary definition of memoir. From the French, mémoire, from the Latin, memoria, memory, remembrance, and any non-fiction narrative writing that is based on the author's personal memories. And the assertions made in the work are thus understood to be factual. So in terms of writing poetry from a photograph invoked from a memory, it's a non-fiction piece of work. So it's something that you're writing about that really happened in your life. But memory is not always something that's reliable. And quite often we create distortions and we fantasize, or we dream, or we use our imagination, and we get very creative and we change the story from the actual truth. And that's okay. That's completely okay. And that is actually key to creating something magical, is to dipping into your imagination even further than you thought you could ever play around with these extra powers that we have here. Because poetry is, it's symphonic telling snapshots of our time. So in the same way that a photograph can capture a moment, a poem can also kind of hold it compact in a neat little treasure box that we keep away, stored in our cerebral. So when poets write, they see through the speaker's eye and what we call the mind's eye. And poetry is often seen as a spiritual meditation in a way. When we close down these eyes and we open up the mind's eye, what is it in here that we see? What is it we're keeping stored? Memories are things that we retrieve and we store, and we do that for a reason. So literally, you have to describe what the speaker sees in order to recreate the world of the speaker in words on a page, so when the reader can translate those words back into images and experience the poem. So basically, you're writing the image into another image, which is this kind of solidification of a continuum of art form, and how ekphrastically, ekphrasis is a word when you would use one art form in response to another art form. So you would write a poem about a painting or about a sculpture, or a painting can be painted from the response of a poem, and vice versa. And in this way, it's continuous, and it's really quite fun to play with, actually. It's a pattern. So if we think about where does poetry come from? It comes from the imagination. So the imagination, imagine, image. So this is the language of creative writing, what the dictionary defines as a mental picture, which as writers we see through the mind's eye. So when we read writing, our mind processes the words into mental images with the 5 senses. Now this is key. This is key to dipping into those stored memories, to use sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. And when we are writing poetry, we want to give our readers the world in its raw form, its physical, concrete existence. And the more specific we can be, the better. So how does poetry affect the reader? With sensations. Sensations, sensual, sense. So this is how we make sense of the writing and how we make sense of the words on the page. We don't really understand through abstract thought. We understand mentally through what our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, and our skin actually understand physically. So when we're looking at our photograph, we want to really kind of tap into how our body feels in that moment. But I'm going to give you exact techniques and how to dip into that before. I just want to give you a kind of a rough, kind of universal image of what poetry is in response to photographs. So these natural powers, they're not supernatural powers. They're very natural powers that we receive, how we receive information from the world around us. They're natural to our bodies, and poetry enables us to use and to sharpen those methods of creating a narrative from tapping into the senses. And language is deeply rooted in the body, and poetry enables us to sharpen those powers. So, as I spoke about in the brief, memory and experience are fertile places for poets, and it's where the seeds of our stories are planted, and all writing blooms from memory. Do you have a memory that you love so much that you want to freeze in time and capture in a poem, just to say we were talking about the photograph would snap up the special moment? And why do we remember some things and not everything? Should we just write about the most memorable things in our life? We actually encode good memories and bad memories, and both of them are equally powerful to write about. We retain them for a reason, to later retrieve them. But some memories repeat and some memories fade. So we're going to learn some techniques around images, sounds, or meaning to polish up those blurry memories from our mind. So we all have a photograph today, and I'm very interested to see whether it's a digital one, because we're taking photos all the time now. Is it one that, you know, a memory is something that happened yesterday as well as something that happened 10 years ago. A memory is something that instantaneously happened 1 second ago. That last sentence I said is now a memory. So we're very much caught up in this linear chronology and speed of thoughts and inspiration. So if we look at our photographs, so I want you to do is to have a look at them. And just as you're looking at them, think about the clues that are captured in the photographs, and if they trigger kind of further visuals or feelings that we can then transfer into a beautiful language. Also, I want you to think about whether you really remember what happened in that photograph, or are we just remembering the photos themselves rather than the memory of the photograph, which is also quite interesting because, again, our imagination can play tricks on us quite a lot of the time. We keep photographs to remember, we write poems to remember, and just like shared memories, where selective people at the same event have the same memory, each person will feel different about it. So you can show that photograph to other people that were in that photograph at that time in the memory, and they'll have a different memory from that day, because everyone has a different perception, which is also wonderful, because whatever you write, you can never really be wrong. And then with poetry, you have this kind of poetic license to never really be wrong anyway either. I mean, you could be wrong grammatically, but other than that, in terms of its semantic meaning, you are allowed to decipher it the way that you please. So we don't keep these photographs for special occasions anymore, for weddings and holidays and memorable experiences. So the fact that we have this collection of photographs on our phone, always to kind of remind us what happened and to be constantly reliving experiences and using that to our ability, if we feel that we're perhaps maybe having a bad day and we want to be reminded of a good time, we will look at a photograph that's of a good memory, and that will make us feel better. So the techniques for memory. When we're reviewing and rehearsing, and these rewords are important because it's always a return and a redo and a continuum again, this information, practice strengthens the connections between the synapses that store memory, so we can improve our memories. So this is memory retrieval, because we think about, again, how accurate is memory, because the brain is repeatedly reassembling disparate fragments stored in several parts of the brain, and it often creates distortions, as I spoke about earlier. So these distorted synthesis of fragments may actually repeat themselves and be something that we recall in memory on repeat. And the more we remember it to happen, the more it really did happen, basically. So what does memory serve in terms of narrative? It's not so much what you saw, but it's how you felt that you want to engage with more. Memories have similarities between memories and dreams. And then again, this is where the imagination and the unconscious play, is those exciting nuggets of inspirations. So in terms of bad memories, we actually tend to remember bad memories more than our good memories, because bad memories are easier to access because they actually originally tended to the senses more at the time. So we have this kind of increased biological arousal during that negative experience, which then induces longevity of that memory. So if we have awareness of this, we can actually kind of focus on putting those bad memories at the back and going, I'm just remembering you more because I felt like extra emotional in that time. But if we can tend to something that was maybe more common every day, something that happened that wasn't extraordinary, but it made you feel safe and it made you feel comfortable, and it just reminded you of a good time, then we can, you know, play around and actually not let ourselves think negative thoughts. We can draw. Right now, I would like us to do, so we're going to do one, I've spoken for a little bit, so we're going to do a little 5-6 minute exercise of writing, and then we're going to do another 2 15 minutes lodges later on after I've given you further techniques. But first of all, I just want us to focus. We can look at our photograph, and if there's someone in the photo that we want to talk about just now, then we can do that. Or we can just focus on one person, someone that we used to know, but that we no longer know anymore. So we don't have any recent memories of them. Okay, so someone that made an impact on us. And I just want you to take 5-6 minutes to think of that person and to write down all the things that you remember about them. Whether that is someone in your photograph, or whether that's someone that's just come to your mind that you just want to celebrate in memory just now. So I'll give you 5-6 minutes to do that. And we'll keep that for later on because we're going to add it all together and create some wonderful work. Okay, 18 past. Okay, 6 minutes. And also, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat as we're writing. So a question here, what was the word you used that means using one art form to create another? Ekphraxis. So someone, yeah, there we go, faster than I was. Yeah, So yeah, writing from a photograph is very much so a piece of ekphrastic poetry. So as you are thinking about this person, I want you to think about whether there was a time that you felt happy around them, or if you felt really sad. And is there a story there? Although not all poems necessarily need a narrative, they can be more abstract than that. Were they in a place that we remember? Where were we with them? And also, just as we come up to the end of our 6 minutes, you don't have to wait to writing prompts to write. You can have pen, paper in front of you the entire time, and anytime you feel inspired, then don't let those thoughts evade you. Definitely put them down, because memory fades. You might forget it in a heartbeat. So we're into our 6 minutes, and I just want to talk a little bit now about kind of the science of the faculty of the mind, because I think the more understanding we have, the more we can kind of play around with actually navigating the powers of our mind. So the faculty of the mind stores information, and our brain uses a series of encoding. Now there's 3 different ways of that happening. So it's the visual, which is the picture, acoustic, which is the sound, and the semantic, which is the meaning. And memory is an experience that undergoes storage and retrieval. So personal memories provide the foundation for a rich sense of oneself and one's life, and it gives rise to something called nostalgia. Sensory memory is very brief. Short-term memory is slightly longer, and long-term memory can last a lifetime. We bring memory into our conscious awareness, but now somehow we have to ascend back to a time to transcend that whilst we're writing. So here's the secret. Creation, writing, and memory, there are 3 facets of the same essence. So it all boils down to experiencing, particularly its connection to time and the present moment. Now you're all very young, so you shouldn't have a problem with remembering things, but you might not even have enough memories to write about, at least not ones that seem worthy of writing about. So there are key times in our life that stick with us in a universal stream: the birth of a baby sibling, the death of a pet, the first day at school, these kind of key moments in our life. There's also a concept which I find very fascinating that I want to share with you called meta experience writing. So we remember the memorable experience and then why we had those feelings in that experience, but then we don't talk about how we feel today and how we might even feel in the future about it, if you really want to be clever with your poem, to bring memory into the present and write about how that affects the future. For example, the photograph that I have just picked up from an album here is one of me when I was maybe 25. I'm now 39. And that was my daughter there. I was very young. We were in Italy and we were in a play park that was covered in this wonderful art and graffiti. And I'm kind of posing in a little dress there after being on the beach all day. So when I look at that photograph, I think to myself, well, how did I feel in that moment? I was happy. I was in another country. It was sunny. It was summer. The food was lovely. The smell of the trees. My daughter, for the first time, running around a park, and well, not the first time, but in Italy, it definitely was. So that's me going back into the experience. Now, if I think about that photo in the way that I feel today, now being over a decade later, what's happened during that time, how I've changed, how's the relationship with my daughter, have I been back to Italy? Then I can think about how that affects me in the future, looking back at that memory, thinking about how I am today, and then how that makes me see things in the future. So it's very interesting how you can play around with these images and how they can open up so many other portals to so many different ways of being and feeling very kind of secure in oneself, and have a sense of belonging. So practices like this, they're very good for mental health, because like I said earlier, we can easily forget the good times and we let these negative experiences, just because they are stronger in our memory, take precedent. But if we're having a bad day and we think about that good memory, you know, memories of your loved ones, they can bring down your stress. It's as if conjuring up the memory of them can make them immediately available to us. And evoking positive memories is enormously powerful, because when we're in throes of maybe having a bad day and feeling really, really stressed, the good memories are the first things to disappear, because we have this skewed sense of the world and everything is suddenly gray and then nothing brings joy, no matter, you know, what unhealthy preoccupation is swamping us takes over. So getting nostalgic about these happy events and having this store in your mind to draw on is one way of kind of building up resilience to when we do have our bad days, because we will always continue to have bad days and good days, because that's the journey of being human. But if we think back to these better times, even if they're tinged with a little bit of sadness, it can help cope with them with challenging times ahead. So thinking about happy memories decreases the levels of the cortisol that we produce, which is known as the stress hormone. So scientifically proven, okay? I want now to do another little test as we go in through this webinar, and I want us now to practice our abilities of memory. So the little test I'm going to do with you, I'm going to ask you to try and remember, don't write it down, you have to try and remember this in your head, in your mind, these 3 groups of words and letters. Okay, and then I'm going to test you at the end to see if you remembered. Okay, so we've got 3 letters, J, Q, and P. Next group, we have 3 words, big, huge, massive. And then we have in the 3rd group, blue, Dream Street, and Berlin. A little experiment, okay? So we use these words, these spellings, which are spells. So why is it called writing from your memory? In a technical context about memory, it is simply mentioned as write. We're not writing from memory, we're just writing. As I said at the beginning, everything that's happened that we're drawing experience from is a memory. And it makes sense, because writing always comes from the memory, whether it's long term or short term, unless you write what you read without looking at what you're writing, which would be really unusual. So before you write, you must experience. So all writing comes from memory. Even writing about the present becomes the past once it's written, and so then it comes from memory. Though a memory from a few minutes ago might be more detailed and than a vivid memory from about 10 years ago. So photographs frame fragments of our memory, and they can give us access to stories that can be real or imagined. That's the recap there. You don't have to understand the object perfectly. It's only necessary that the picture jars creativeness within you and gives you images that trigger images that you have real associations with in your mind already. Once you start on the concrete when writing your poem, and then after that you've earned the right to move on to other aspects in the poem, like interpretation, philosophizing, explaining. So start with the concrete images, and then you can relax and then have fun with the rest. So right now I would like you to look at your photograph and have a think, but not write anything down, because we'll save 15 minutes at the end of this, because these are the tips now for writing poetry from photographs that I've put in bullet points. Okay. When writing poems about your photograph, you want to focus on descriptive language. Paint the picture in words for your reader. Focus on the details of the picture that stand out to you. When you're looking at the photograph, you want to think of it as an art piece. Some of the most essential features to consider are color, depth, form, line, shape, size, and texture. You may want to ask yourself what kind of people would go along with the picture. Poems are not really for developing a full-on story with detailed characterization and plot. Save that for your short stories and your fiction. You only get wisps of character, because poems for the most part are about brevity, a snapshot, or a mood. Look for any descriptions that might come in handy, captions, dates. If it's an old photograph, you might have a date on the back. Any historical references can be helpful. What's the date of the picture and what kind of things happened during that time, on a universal level or just on a personal level. Studying the photo, describe the first details noticed. What do you see in the picture? Where or when was it taken? Who is in the photo? What is the action or the scene? What are the persons, what are the people doing in there? And it's okay, again, remember, it's okay to make guesses or imagine if you don't know. Photographs and poems are compressions or abstractions of reality, and they encourage each other's obliquity. Take a second and a third look at the photo. Take it in. How does the photo really make you feel? Capture a reflection, describe it. I feel because, let me explain it. And then imagine what happened in the moments before the photograph were taken. Do you think the people in the photo, what do you think they were thinking about during the photograph? And then maybe even perhaps what happened in the moments after the photograph, or much later on in life. Again, that's the meta experiencing, jumping between those three different time frames. What exists outside the frame? Everything has the screen has a frame. You can see everything in my room here behind me. What goes on beyond that? There's also other places and spaces for you to use your imagination. And lastly, imagine being there. Imagine being inside the photograph. And when it comes to descriptive language, you want to focus on those 5 senses. So consider what you could sense if you were inside the picture. What would you hear? What would you see? What would you taste? What would you touch? And what would you smell? So actually step, is that teleporting in back in time again? Step into the photograph, into that moment. And what was it like? What do you see and hear? What do your own senses reveal? And then write down some ideas and some words. So we're at 35 almost. This is your 15 minutes now. A nice portion of time, because you need it to go into memory retrieval. It isn't something that happens instantaneous. And see what you can get. I'll give you 15 minutes. Thank you. You will have another 15 minutes. You've got one more after this. So this is just to kind of put down those rough ideas after you've heard the techniques. Okay, so I've given you 10 minutes instead of 15, but by all means, continue writing in the background. I just want to talk to you a little bit more and then have an opportunity at the end to give you 10 more minutes after that, and then have a look at some of the work that you've created and discuss it. So I want to talk to you a bit more about the kind of neurological, psychological ideas of memory. And Sherlock Holmes, the legendary detective from the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle series, said that the brain is like an attic where we store all of our junk. So is our memory limited like a storage capacity of a computer? And if we had endless storage and never forgot anything, what would life be like if we never forgot anything? So what actually happens is that many brain cells work together to make us create memories. And a memory only happens when a specific group of neurons fire at the same capacity. So the hippocampus is key to making memories, but it's not the only place that they're stored. Memories aren't just stored in one part of the brain, which is fascinating because you actually can kind of dip in and dip out of all these various portals and places and Pandora's boxes that we have up there. And different types are stored across different interconnected brain regions. So for explicit memories, which are about events that happened to you, episodic, as well as general facts and information, semantic, which are they're stored in three important areas of the brain: the hippocampus, the neocortex, and the amygdala. And explicit memories, such as motor memories, rely on the basal ganglia and cerebellum. These are very big words. I'm a poet, I should be able to taste them in my mouth. So short-term working memory relies heavily on the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala, which is an almond-shaped structure in the brain's temporal lobe, attaches emotional significance to these memories. So each part of the brain has its own part to play, basically. And this is especially important because strong emotional memories, those that are associated with shame, joy, love, or grief, are the ones that are difficult to forget. So I just find it fascinating because once you learn the brain's process, you can almost kind of rewire it to open up parts of your life that you have actually filed away. And we're not just a machine or a robot. We have more control over our body and our thoughts than we think. And once we understand the science and the biology, we could recognize how much of a miracle process the power of the mind is. Remember, sometimes something we only imagined can feel like it really happened. And we have these ways of forgetting as well. Memories fade. Also, when we sleep, we erase our outdated memories. When we're actually sleeping, we erase memories. So like tuning and pruning connections. And sometimes we intentionally suppress memories. So we motivate ourselves to forget so that we can move forward. For example, we might decide to forget that a friend hurt our feelings so that we stop feeling negative from that experience. And if we didn't forget, we would suffer from regret, and we would be constantly replaying everything we'd ever experienced, always internalizing. So we know why we forget, but how do we remember? So memorization can be the best way to help you learn something. It's a complex and finely tuned mechanism. Our brain is a mind palace, a term coined by the ancient Greeks. You see the things that you know you need, and you remember them. So for example, you walk into a friend's house after school, and you park your car or your bike outside, and then you go inside and you put your keys down and then your bag down on a table somewhere. And then it gets a little bit hot later on and you take off your jacket and then you put that somewhere else. And at the end of the night, it's kind of like a metal detector. That might find treasures, metal treasures. We have this technique, motor memory senses and muscle memory. Our body remembers how to ride that bike and how to find all the things that we put down, because we have this unconscious placing of body parts and we leave this mental map. So memory is incredible because it's part of the cognitive domain, and it's where we take information through our environment and we encode that information into our brain, and then we store it and then we retrieve it. And conscious memory and unconscious memory, and what we actively try to remember, like a name or someone's number, versus something that we don't try to remember, it just happens, which is the sensory memory. So now, after saying all that, I wonder if anyone can remember the 3 letters, the 3 words, and the 3 word descriptions in the 3 groups. If you can remember any of them, I would like you to put it inside the chat on the right-hand side of my screen. I wonder if anyone wrote it down and cheated. Giving you a lot to think about. Excellent. Okay. Those were the 3 letters, yes, PQJ, but the other way around, JPQ. So I'll go on to explain that. Can anyone remember any of the middle words? Big, huge, massive, blue, Dream Street, Berlin. Well done. Well done. A, Atlas, you have perfect memory. Oh, JQP, PQ, apart from the, it's interesting. Okay, so letters, they can be grouped easily. It's just a way of memorization. Okay, so they're difficult to visualize because we can't really visualize letters. So we use like auditory hallucinations. So J, well done, S, well done, Sally. Blue something Berlin, Dream Street. Great, excellent. So we would work with the letters in the sounding of them so that they sound similar, and it was the first thing to be spoken. So that's the easiest one to claim and store. The 3 words in the middle, they are fairly dissimilar. One would expect maybe small, medium, large, which would be easier to memorize, but I gave you something harder, big, huge, massive. And you both did well with that. So you have great memory. And yeah, and the last ones you would visualize. So blue is a color, so you would see the color blue. And Dream Street, you would see the street sign in Berlin. I thought of a blue Dream Street in Berlin. Wonderful, exactly. And that is the way that our mind manages to store these memories, through these visualizations and grouping sounds and colors and images and whatever we create together to remember, to recall, to recognize, and then to relearn. And not only can we retrieve these memories from the past, we can also make new ones. And it places us in time, and it feels chronological. And also these are the tests that you would take at school to remember things. So recall, recognition, relearning. Recall is bringing things to the front that have persisted over time. So example would be like when you fill in the blanks, the capital of Greece is, and you've got this blank. That would be recall memory. Recognition is more like a multiple choice test where you take the answer from 3 different variations that you're presented with. So which of the following is not a city in Greece? And then you'd have A, B, or C. That's recognition memory. And then relearning is refreshing, like when you study before a test and you just fill your brain with research, and then you have this kind of wider sea to splash into when you're asked questions. So I think it's really great how we can actually strengthen our memory. Now I want to read you a poem. I'm not going to screen share because I actually think that the sound of the poem works just as well as seeing the concrete image, especially if you're remembering. It's by a German poet, famous German poet and philosopher, Rainer Maria Rilke. And here in this poem, he's describing a photograph. Also keep writing in the background if any ideas are coming to you, want to go back into your image and your line breaks, then definitely no restrictions. In the eyes, dream, the brow as if it could feel something far off. Around the lips, a great freshness, seductive, though there was no smile. Under the rows of ornamental braid on the slim imperial officer's uniform, the saber's basket hilt, both hands stay folded upon it, going nowhere, calm and now almost invisible, as if they were the first to grasp the distance and dissolve. And all the rest so curtained with itself, so cloudy that I cannot understand this figure as it fades into the background. Oh, quickly disappearing photograph in my more slowly disappearing hand. And that was called Portrait of My Father as a Young Man. And it was translated by Stephen Mitchell. And I can send you a copy of that if you need that afterwards, if you're interested. Now, poetry and photography, they're very clearly distinct art forms. And the history of poetry is obviously much longer than that of photography, of course. One makes pictures out of words and the other makes pictures out of light. Most photographs represent a fraction of time that's contained in most poems. Words and photographs are both special types of sign. If the written word is the image of spoken language, then the photograph is the image of visual subject. So writing from photographs as a form ekphraxis is a very hard word to say, but it is a beautiful thing to work with. I remember I worked at the National Galleries on Princess Street maybe about over 5 years ago, and I would just have to walk around the galleries and make sure no one touched any of the paintings. And I had so much silence and so much time to sit still with myself. And I had these tiny little black books that the wardens were given to write down any suspicious behavior in the gallery, but I would write poems in there about the paintings and all the artwork that was around me, because I was constantly surrounded and I was constantly inspired. And there's also something quite fascinating about how we let the mind roam into paintings that are otherwise stilled and not moving. There's this great philosopher called Stendhal, and he was in French philosopher. He was in Florence for the first time, and I think it was a Caravaggio painting he's seen for the first time in the Uffizi, very famous art gallery in Florence. And there's actually this syndrome now called Stendhal syndrome, that when you look at a painting, I think his exact words were, I stood in front of the painting, the clouds richouetted on the ceiling, I felt myself overcome by a huge powerful, and what happens is that the senses were all invoked, the painting came alive. You know, imagine horses kind of painted and stuck in time, and then you can get into it so much with your imagination that the horses start galloping again, and you can hear the sound of the stampede and the dust kick up, if we allow ourselves to kind of really fall into these places, these visual places. So ekphractic writing, piece of art directly responding to another piece of art, poems about paintings inspired by poetry. But as bidding poets here today, we're here to give delectable language to things we see in order to see it from a different perspective and to understand it on a deeper level. So I'm just going to talk about very quickly, let's see, a famous painting. So we're going to go into that ekphraxis world now that we've all seen and then we all have visual memory of, Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. Now, he was very much an artist with a vivid, original style, so that most people can recognize his work separate from others. And the poem I'm going to read to you is by an American confessional poet called Anne Sexton, and she was responding to Van Gogh's Starry Night. And although Sexton doesn't have a distinct memory of seeing that actual sky that was painted from behind the asylum bars that Van Gogh was currently staying, was he having a hotel stay? Did he have chocolates under his pillow? And she also suffered similar bouts of depression and depletion, the same as Van Gogh. And I do believe that this kind of like similar relativity and relatability and makes one immediately comfortable and keen to decipher what's actually going on in the work on the levels of synchronicity and intuition. So this is called The Starry Night by Anne Sexton. And it starts with a quote from his diary that he wrote to his brother Theo. That does not keep me from having a terrible need of, shall I say the word religion? Then I go out at night to paint the stars. This is the poem. The town does not exist, except where one black-haired tree slips up like a drowned woman into the hot sky. The town is silent. The night boils with 11 stars. Oh, starry night, this is how I want to die. It moves. They are all alive. Even the moon bulges in its orange irons to push children like a god from its eye. The old unseen serpent swallows up the stars. Oh, starry, starry night. This is how I want to die, into that rushing beast of the night, sucked up by the great dragon, to split from my life with no flag, no belly, no cry. Now, what I think is interesting about this poem is that first we see how Sexton describes the scene, and it's how she sees it to be, starting with absence of activity, absence of society. It's only nature reeling in the background, and then there's this silence. And I also wondered, is there exactly 11 stars in that painting? I don't know. I think I have to go back. I haven't checked. I'll have to check. And then we have this contradiction in the center when she wants to die in a place that makes her feel more alive, which is a lovely oxymoron, and it gives you something deeper to think about. There's the addition of dragons and serpents, though I don't remember those being in the painting. But we can think of the swirls in the sky and how they resemble great beasts that pirouette and naturally curl in on themselves. So writing from an image allows us to use our imagination. What do you see that might not be there? What do you remember to be there beyond the lens, the unsurpassable that cannot be shown in ink, in paint, or capture? And that's where the magic lies, in the myth, in the new ways of seeing and sharing. So Sexton here relies heavily on sound in the sense of the absence of it. And everything is muted for this spin where the images and the colors speak the loudest. Yes, there's 11 stars and 1 moon. I have a print in front of me. Fantastic. So she was accurate. She must have been staring at the painting while she was writing the poem, rather than just from having a memory of it. Wow. Is there a dragon and a serpent, though, hidden away behind one of the trees? So the relationship between poem and photographs always been one of disruption and serendipity, appropriation and exchange, evocation and metaphor. And photographs are often referred to as having poetic qualities. A photograph and a poem may have similar qualities. So the meanings of these photographs, they're never fixed. You can go back and write another poem and another poem. Nothing is fixed in time, and nothing gives just one story. Have you ever heard the saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but when it comes to poetry, we only need a few. So we're going to spend 10 more minutes, and then we're going to speak about the work for 20 minutes, just kind of polishing up some more of our poem. And we don't have to labor too much over the language or the words or the diction, and just open up this gateway in your mind and let the voice kind of filter through you. And if it doesn't feel like it's fun, then you're probably doing it wrong. So understand that by stepping into that picture, you're returning to another time. And maybe it wasn't a place that you were part of. Maybe you were a baby, and maybe your memory was not imprinting strongly at that time because you were developing. But if it's a photograph of a beach, notice how you can suddenly feel yourself warming in the summer sun. And also back to that nostalgia, because that's very important, about feeling nostalgic and having this sentimental, longing, wistful affection for a reflection of the past. And it's very healthy to be nostalgic, because nostalgia makes us more optimistic, and it reaffirms our social connections, and we remember important things about the past, and then lays vision for a hopeful future. So the word nostalgia actually comes from the Greek word homecoming and ache. So it allows us to return to the sense of home and belonging, especially when we're feeling particularly isolated and alone. Personal memories from long ago of family and friends can link us together in shared comforts and tradition. And it lends a gratifying sense of community into our lives. So memories, nostalgia. Just finish reading this as you write, and then we'll discuss the mental journey back through time adds a 4th dimension to the present. If mindfulness is the focal point of the eternal now, nostalgia forms a special continuum in the timeless past, expanding our concept of self. So the future might be vague, inchoate, unpredictable, but the past represents the finished whole that cannot be harmed or tampered with. So the activity of looking at a photograph and feeling nostalgic and feeling inspired to celebrate that time using language and creating a poem, it allows us to cast off some of the stresses of modern life and to go back to a period of our own choosing, you know, as if we would maybe confine ourselves and escape in a book or in a dark cinema. And most of the time, there's a happy ending if we've chosen a good memory to retrieve. And nostalgia increases positive mood, motivates people to focus on cultivating positive relationships. These things are all very important, and helps us pursue healthy life goals. So, and it also softens our existential fears about death. So taking a walk down memory lane can have really kind of hidden benefits for your mind, health, and relationships, because nostalgia boosts optimism, sparks inspiration, and fosters creativity. So we're going to have 10 more minutes. At 5:15, we're going to, if you would like to share your poems and your photographs, or whenever anyone is ready, because I like the idea of continuing, always writing, never needing anyone to tell you to write now. When the moment sparks, and you have to always keep a journal to keep those words down. But I'll give you some space, some silence to finish off your poems. I'm just wondering, as you have a few more minutes to finish off your poem, if there's anyone that has finished and would like to read it, or perhaps paste it in the chat and I can read it out. I'm happy to read. Wonderful, Beatrix. Excellent. Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
I kind of wrote a mini one, but I'll read out the main one that I did.
Of course.
I don't see you. We are all frozen, posing, hoping. I don't see you. We just stood there, picture perfect, smiling, lying. We just stood there. They all walk by, don't even tilt their heads. Overlooked, crooked, they all walk by. You walked away too soon. Pain, shame, you walked away. Now I hardly know you. You are long gone, away, stay. I hardly know you.
Wow, that was absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. The repetition there and how it just folded into itself and the rhythms. I wonder how you wrote it, Beatrix. Is it quite narrow lines?
Yeah.
Line breaks, yeah. Absolutely beautiful. And I love also how you took the idea of maybe the photograph not telling the truth. That's very clever, because that's correct. We do pose and we do put on a persona, and it's not necessarily reality. Thank you so much for sharing. Also, in the way that you deliver, you read really well.
Thank you.
Really beautiful. Thank you. So touching. I'm lost in transit with that. I was taken into another time, another place without even seeing the image, just understanding what that was about or not about. Does anyone else have anything that they would like to share? I just finished mine. I'm happy to read it out. Excellent. Thank you, Atlas.
Hi there.
Hi.
Would you like to know what the picture was first? Before?
Absolutely. If you feel you would like to describe it and it's not described enough in the poem, then of course, yes. What was the picture of, Atlas?
I'll just say it was a picture of me about 8 years old with my dog Jack, kind of lying down here inside. So I think that's how I'll set it up.
Thank you.
It is black and white, light and dark. In the frame he's lying with most of himself hidden under the sofa. I am leaning against him, eyes half closed, feeling his warmth and tremulous heartbeat, smelling his dogged autumn scent. He is gazing out, calm and curious. He's looking at our mother, holding the camera, but his eyes pierce the lens and sever the ears, and he looks at me. Half his face visible, half in shadow, his eye a glint, a fox's eye, yesterday's star, a little piece of winter, warm and cool. And he's looking at me, half real, half not, half gone, half alive.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Atlas. So incredibly wonderful last line there. You just flipped everything on its head. Also, yesterday's star, not quite as visible as to tonight's star, and back again to that starry night, and just had me there. I also love the way that you have looked at the gaze and the different kind of perspectives of viewing. So we have the dog looking at you, the dog looking at the lens of the camera, at your mother behind the camera. There's all these kind of different vortexes of watching and viewing and being watched, which I think is really, really clever. Yesterday's star, I'm stealing that. I really feel like I need to. It was really incredible. Can't believe you just wrote these both just now, Beatrix and Atlas. I mean,
thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing. I wonder if Beatrix would like to describe her photograph, or is she just, are you just happy reading out the poem? Just want to give you that opportunity.
So the photo, I can actually have it. I'm not really sure if you can see it right there. It was on my last day of primary 6. I left to go to a new school, and that was me with all my friends, but my best friend actually wasn't in that photo.
That's why you couldn't see them. Oh, right. How clever.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So the absence became the presence, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the same way that Sexton's silence became everything else was sounding. Okay, we have time for another one if anyone else would like to share. Okay. Right, no one else want to share? Well, that's absolutely fine. You know yourself that you've got the work there. Hopefully there has been enough inspiration and incentive passed on from myself. I'm very passionate about it, so I do tend to talk a lot. So I hope that some of that was absorbed and you are inspired. And just remember that your feelings are important. Being heard is important. Celebrating love is important. Harnessing the strength and the healing properties of memory are important. And poetry is important because it's embalmed in all things and it keeps us all connected. So thank you so much today for joining this creative writing webinar. And I think the poetry from these classes are just going to be incredible. So I'm very excited about that.